it had been a very grim 2 years. I hadn't written anything for at least 2 years, maybe 2.5. When I say I hadn't written anything, I mean I had written nothing. Not I had been writing badly. I had written nothing, not a word, not an article, not a noun. I was living in Vermont, which I loved, and I loved the world in which I was living, except for this desolating and increasingly harrowing fact that I wasn't writing anything. And I felt, I go through periods like this with some painful frequency, and I feel always that this is the authentic nadir. The others were dress rehearsals, but this is the one that is not the tunnel, it is a well, and you're not getting out. And but there's a backstory which needs to be told. When I first moved to Vermont, which was about 10 years before this, one of my very good friends asked if I wanted to see the famous local clairvoyant. And I said, of course I did. And so we went together. And the famous local clairvoyant asked, you were allowed to ask questions, but she wanted to look at your palm first. And she looked at my palm and she said, "You will be very successful." And I asked her about my love life, and she said, "Oh, stay away from him." But then I asked her about my work, and at the time, I wrote in a very craftsmanlike and patient and slow way, and I had just finished my second book. And she said, "You will write 5 books." And I thought, that's fine. They each take about 10 years, and then I'll die. It's going to do me fine. So I was elated until the book speeded up a bit. And my 5th book was a book I'm very partial to, but it's a very prosaic book called Ararat, and all the beauty of the language has been leached out. It's unornamented, austere, colloquial language. All the poems about one subject, a family. And I thought it makes sense that this is the last book, because look at it, it has no poetry in it anymore. And what I did for those 2 years, I did 2 things. I didn't read. I read catalogs. I read garden catalogs. I was becoming very, very interested in gardening, and my then husband was also, but it was initially my passion, which he came to participate in avidly and share fully. And so I read the catalogs, and I listened to Don Giovanni. And I kept thinking, no, of course I can't write. Look at me. All I'm doing is reading about plants. And I felt I had no inner life. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible time. Of course, it's easy to talk about a terrible, terrible time in the period after it has ended. But when you're going through it, each day begins with the sort of sense that you have to write a poem, and it ends with the fact that you haven't. Right. And all through that time, I had one line in my head that had come as a sort of donné, and I thought, oh, gorgeous line, just beautiful line. At the end of my suffering, there was a door.
You got that?
2 years ahead,
wow.
But I had nowhere to put it. I didn't know out of what situation it came. I didn't know who was saying it. And so first it was a gift, and I would treasure it and whisper it to myself.
Did you write it down?
I didn't need to.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't need to. I'm sure I did, but you didn't, I would remember it. And I would say it, and then somewhere around a year, when still nothing more had happened, I had tried a few little false starts, it became a torment. I would wake up in the morning and I would think at the end of my suffering there was a door, and that was the door. That was it. And I tried to tell myself maybe it was a very short poem, all on its own. It was really, 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 really bad. And finally, the year before, that book was written very quickly, but the year before, I asked my goddaughter in Williamstown to give me an assignment. I said, Elizabeth, I haven't written in a really long time, but if you give me an assignment, I can't fail you. And she gave me an assignment, and I wrote the poem, and it was a very poor poem, but at least I had something. And I thought it began to be part of the proof that I couldn't write, because look how dead that one was. It ended up in that book because, surrounded by other material, it took on a different kind of life. But finally, I turned off Mozart and went to the garden. It was early spring, and I thought, make myself write a poem about a flower. I know flowers. And so I wrote a poem about a flower, and it wasn't very good. But then I thought, but it's in lines, it's words. If I walk away from them, I can see them black on white. And so then the next day, I wrote another poem about a flower. And the third day, I thought, I know what to do. And I wrote the book in 8 weeks. I wrote a lot of these later books very, 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 very fast, after periods of nothing. And it's exhausting. And then when you finish, you have no sense of having made the thing. You think you stole it, or you remembered it, or it's someone else's, and you've plagiarized, not meaning to.
Are you talking about working day and night over 8 weeks with a lot of revision, or
no?
Did each poem come as it is?
More or less. Some were fiddled with a bit. I mean, all of those books that are written fast, everything just comes out